So my name is Leonie and I'm a member of the National Executive of SERA, which is Labour's campaign for the environment. And we're doing a consultation about food and food waste, food sustainability, because we want to put in a really good submission to the Labour Party's big consultation that they're doing at the moment, because they want to improve our policy on food sustainability. And I'm here slightly damp because it's raining today, but with Martin. And do you want to introduce yourself, Martin?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Martin Bowman. I'm a campaigns manager for a group called This Is Rubbish. We don't think everything is rubbish, but we do think food waste is rubbish. So we mainly campaign on food waste issues and food sustainability.
So we've already done a bit of a survey to try and figure out what SERA members consider to be priorities, and we've both had the chance to have a quick look at the results from that. And not surprisingly, or maybe surprisingly, I don't know, that we asked people to rank things from 1 to 12 across a whole series of topics, and the top three were water, corporate power, and also coming up with agro-ecological alternatives to the current system. Is that a surprise to you, Martin, that those were the priorities, or would those have been your priorities if you completed the survey?
Oh, I think that's a really good range of options. I mean, I think corporate power rests at the kind of is the core of a lot of the other issues on the survey, actually. So I hate to bring it to food waste immediately, but this may be a running theme, but we've seen, for instance, in the supply chain, a huge amount of food waste arising because of unfair trading practices, and that's a really fantastic Labour policy, I think, that to extend the remit of the Grocers Code Adjudicator to protect farmers from fair trading practices, as we see so many farms experiencing last-minute order cancellations. At the last minute, a retailer will turn around and say, this fruit and vegetable is the wrong size or shape, we're going to reject the order, and that results in a huge amount of food waste. So,
well, that's that end of the food chain, if you like, the logistical food chain, coming from the field to the shop. But it's very interesting that it says water as well as agro-ecological alternatives, and you're mentioning waste, because I think that two of the areas where we can all have some sort of personal impact is reducing our water use, because we're pretty, I mean, we're nowhere near what the Environment Agency says we ought to be using. And actually, London is particularly bad. London is used about 150 litres of water a day, which is way over what we ought to be using, and is more than any other region in the country, so naughty Londoners. But also food waste, that's also something we can crack down on personally, isn't it?
yeah, absolutely, and I think the food, with regards to the food system, a huge amount of water is used in farming. I think globally, something like 70% of the world's fresh water is used in farming, in growing the food, and about 20% is used in manufacturing processes, and only about 10% is used in sort of household water consumption. So actually, targeting kind of your food waste reduction is ironically one of the ways that you can most reduce your water impact as an individual as well. So, we can all play a part in that, definitely.
Yes, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think the sort of personal use of water is one thing. You also mentioned in manufacturing processes, and of course a lot of these processes, people don't really think about the amount of water that's used in textile production. So
Absolutely.
One of the reasons why people were choosing water, corporate power and agri-alternatives is because they were then tying that together with issues relating to air pollution and of course climate change, climate emergency, being very much at the top of the agenda, and our members in SERA are very acutely aware of that. So I think that's really interesting that people have sort of seen that very much as a piece. What do you think about land use? You did start off by mentioning farmers and the problems with orders being cancelled. Do you think we've also got the balance right in terms of farming?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's really interesting reading the Committee on Climate Change's report recently. One of the things they were looking at is, how can we're going to need to increase restoration of nature. We're going to tackle the climate crisis, and particularly if we want to reach, say, zero emissions by 2030. And some of the biggest, most effective ways of doing that are demand side rather than supply chain side measures. And the committee's report found that reducing food waste, but also shifting away, but even more importantly, shifting away from heavy meat and dairy-based diets is going to be absolutely crucial to that, and is absolutely stunning, I think, in their projections of what would happen if you reduced beef and lamb consumption even by 50% by 2050. Maybe some of the SERA responses think that isn't ambitious enough, and I agree. But even that, they were saying, that would liberate more land than all of the other measures that they looked at put together. There's an astounding amount of land, pasture land, that's dedicated to particularly beef and lamb. But I think in the committee's kind of
well, of course,
paper,
that ties together with lots of other things, like moving towards a more plant-based diet is good for you. Eating less red meat is good for you. Do you think SERA should be coming out very strongly and suggesting that everybody should move towards either becoming a vegetarian, a vegan, or a flexitarian, and just reducing meat consumption overall?
I think absolutely. I mean, a lot of the health recommendations indicate that we need to massively reduce our meat consumption just for our health, and that will have massive benefits for the health service as well. But I don't think we have to tell people necessarily. People can go vegetarian or vegan if they want to. I think the key here is cutting down. You know, we all need to do our bit. And I think this is an international justice issue as well.
Flexitarian rather than saying that everyone has to be vegan.
Yeah, I think you can cutting down on meat generally, and it's up to the individual whether they maybe halve their meat consumption or they completely cut it out. But I think really at its root, this is an international justice angle, because our diets are using a disproportionate amount of the world's land and resources. You know, if everyone in the world adopted the UK's average diet, apparently we'd need 95% of the world's land to grow food, and currently we're on 50%. So you imagine the amount of deforestation.
That's a very good point, because one of the issues that has been raised by many people over the years is the idea that we're leading a 3-planet lifestyle, and lots of people have then applied that to, you know, what we're doing in terms of our energy production and it all coming from fossil fuels. I think the Committee on Climate Change report pointing the finger at our agricultural practices and intensive farming, I think, is particularly damaging, both in terms of climate change but also in terms of land use.
Absolutely.
Do you think just moving towards the kind of practices that are around the rest of the globe, and perhaps small holdings and you know, trying to prioritise perhaps changing land ownership here towards the smaller farmer, do you think that would help?
Yeah, well, I think it's a really interesting idea. A lot of farmers in the UK are sort of approaching retirement, or we've got a very sort of older demographic in farming at the moment. I think there's a real opportunity to kind of offer really good quality jobs in more ecological farming. So, you know, shift our subsidy system towards subsidising more ecological, smaller scale agroecological practices, give really good retirement packages and retraining packages for farmers as well. In the same way that we want to give good jobs to people who are currently working in the coal and oil sectors, we can retrain them to be in renewables. I think we can do the same with farming.
Well, that's really interesting, and it also brings into play the whole point about you know, being more humane and actually providing a life of something that is, you know, I think, you know, if you're a factory farmed chicken, or if you're a cow that's being, you know, farmed very intensively, and you spend your whole life in a shed, that has to be a worse life for that animal. You know, if you are going to produce meat and eat it, and I don't think we are. I think we've just agreed that we're not saying everyone's got to be vegan next week, or even ever, unless they choose to do so. But if we are going to produce meat, then it should be done in a way that gives animals some sort of life that's worth living until the point where we decide that they're ready for the chop. You know, let's not beat about the bush. That's what it is. Do you think that's also part of it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's been a lot of focus on, beef and lamb, for instance, the Committee of Climate Change's report to, because of the domestic methane emissions. But what you have to look at is with pigs and chickens, as you say, there's huge problems with factory farming, and often that's predicated on importing really high impact soya from deforested land in South America. And so I think to counter these tendencies... It's
not just the chlorinated chicken from America, it's also the way that America sucks in the soy from South America, leading to Amazonian deforestation. And we have to be thinking about that if we're serious about the planet, don't we?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, you know, as important as reducing our domestic emissions, which has been the main focus, we need to reduce our consumption emissions, and reducing the impact of animal feed is going to be really key to that. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think moving to a more seasonal approach as well, so that instead of always having the air miles associated with, you know, I've got to have my whatever it is, you know, banana or kiwi fruit or orange flown in at any time of year, rediscovering the amazing abundance that we have in the UK, you know, local apples, you know, of all varieties. We've sort of brought it down to one or two in supermarkets, most of which are quite tasteless, and yet if you look at the original set of apples, and apples are very interesting because they kind of reinvent themselves all the time, and blueberries and pears, you know, we've got a real absolute cornucopia in this country of things that we could be eating rather than all the time flying it in from somewhere else.
Yeah, absolutely. I think air freighted food is one of the top things if you want to cut the carbon footprint of your consumption. Avoid that. I think if stuff is shipped, I think it's slightly better. But as you say, I think it's what's in season. You know, the real killer. Sometimes it's better to import food from a country where it's currently in season there than try and artificially produce it out of season here. So for instance, greenhouse production here locally is very carbon intensive, and sometimes it's better if it's shipped to get it from overseas. But absolutely, I think localising production is super important, and reconnecting with our food and the seasonality of it.
So yeah. I think overall, you know, our members have been hinting at some sort of different future where we have smaller holdings. The way that land is distributed is changed. We don't have agriculture as a sort of big agribusiness. It's much more ecologically friendly, with larger field margins, so that we're not destroying every single pollinator in the country as well. And then we're also looking at something that's far more seasonal, and it's going back to the way that we used to have a much more healthy diet. And if you look at what's happening now with demographics, the people who were brought up in the 40s when there was rationing, and they actually had a very good diet because all the things that are bad for us were actually rationed, are all living now to a very ripe old age, and yet people who are coming up in generations subsequent to them are actually having shorter lifespans. We're actually seeing that tailing off. So I don't think it's not proving very good for us, all this intensive farming, and it's certainly not very good for the planet. But we haven't really sufficiently touched on food waste, I feel, and that was something that was a huge concern. What would you say would be the best way to deal with food waste? Are we talking about anaerobic digestion? I mean, obviously not having food waste in the first place is the best way.
Absolutely. Well, we've always subscribed to this idea of the food waste hierarchy, a bit like a reduce, reuse, recycle for food. And the generally sort of internationally recognised hierarchy is to design it out of the system in the first place. That always has to be our priority, reduce first. And then also get it to market, so get it to people, and that might be through secondary markets, like sort of innovative products, then to animal feeds, and then to AD and compost, and then landfill as a last resort. And I think following that landfill
at all? Do you really think
that's right at the
food?
bottom. You should try and move everything away from that. Yeah, absolutely. And I think whenever food is edible to humans...
Personally, I would like food to be banned from both landfill and probably also from so-called energy from waste or incinerator plants. How would you feel about that if we don't put any more food waste into those?
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree. I think at the very minimum we should be putting food waste into AD and compost. I think there's loads of other opportunities for, we have Sustainable Development Goal 12.3 at the moment, globally trying to halve food waste by 2030, and I think one of the biggest things the UK could do, the UK government has currently said they're consulting on this, is Labour could set a binding legal target to halve food waste from farm to fork, not just at consumer level, across the board by 2030, and that would have a huge contribution to our, not just our emissions reduction, but also free up lots of land potentially to draw down some of that.
Well, that sounds like a very exciting target, and something that perhaps SERA should be including in its response to the Labour consultation on food sustainability. Martin, thank you very much for coming to City Hall to talk to me about food sustainability, food waste, and food miles, and all of the other areas that we've covered today. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.